Hi, everyone. It's Denise Brown. Welcome back to the Caring Conference. And I'm going to help you think about how you can transform your support for your grieving friends. So, as we get started today, I'd love for you to share in the chat room what's the most insensitive comment you've received after a loss. And I'm using loss as a very broad experience. It could be a comment you received after a divorce, after a job loss, after a death, after a particularly bad day, after you've lost something that's really important to you. What is the most insensitive comment? Okay, so in the chat room right away, they're in a better place, meaning that whoever has died is now in a better place. Everyone is better off. It could be worse. In time, you'll be okay. There'll be something better. And Jen is sharing after a miscarriage. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I don't even want to say it, but so after a miscarriage, Jen heard someone say, "It wasn't a real baby yet. Of course it was. Of course he or she was. Of course, of course, of course." Oh, and then Elizabeth is sharing that sometimes it's that you don't hear anything. So a few more comments. It was their time. And Robin is sharing after two deaths back to back. Someone said, "Let me know when you get over this." Oh my gosh. And then another one, "Maybe you're not meant for college." Wow. And then Sophia is sharing, "Life goes on." Wow. Wow. Okay. So I hate to say that we're all in good company, having experienced insensitive comments. And our goal here today is to think about how can we be the ones who offer the sensitivity, who are there for a friend who's experienced a loss. So today's presentation actually was inspired by a different presentation I gave in November. We do an event every year called Our Big Ideas, where we gather to share big ideas that could transform the personal caregiving experience. And at our last event in November, I shared an idea that we have volunteers in the workplace who become our compassionate colleagues. The compassionate colleagues are the individuals who help us when we return to work after a loss. And I gave different ways that this volunteer could help anyone in the workplace. And what was interesting in the conversation around the idea, over and over, those who attended the workshop said to me, "Tell us what to say to help when someone is managing after a loss." So I came up with some ideas, and I'm going to share them with you based on my experience in supporting family caregivers for the past 32 years, and then my own experience having had my brother die unexpectedly in August. So we all have this amazing capacity to be the compassionate support. And I think what's so amazing about this is we know what it's like not to receive it, which is why it's so important for us to give it. Okay, so after my brother died, I connected with a friend who had read his obituary and talked to me about him. And it struck me that doing that was such a powerful way to support me where I was and where I was in terms of experiencing his loss. So when you know a colleague or a friend has had a family member who has died, or a good friend, or even a good colleague, read their obituary. You'll see something in their obituary that is an amazing story that you want to connect to your friend about. So when I met my friend for dinner and she said, "I read the obituary," I thought, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know people read the obituary." Although we all know that, for instance, our parents would have read the obituary once they reached a certain age. It always was, my parents got the morning paper out, and the first thing they did was turn to the obituary section to see who had died. But when it's your family member's obituary and someone takes the time to read it, it really makes you feel so supported because they took the time to learn about the person who had died. In addition, in the obituary, there usually are announcements around services, whether or not there is a service, whether or not there is a request for donations. It might be a donation to a particular charity in lieu of flowers. You want to know that because on the day of the service, you could have your own moment of honoring that family member who died. If you can't attend the service, you can still have a moment of quiet reflection. You can still say a quiet prayer. And then when you connect with your friend or colleague later, you can say, I thought of you and your family member on the day of the service. How did the service go? And then if there is some mention of a donation to a charity, you could think about making that donation. What's common now is that oftentimes a funeral home will arrange to have a tree planted in someone's honor. And so people would buy trees to plant in my brother's honor. And then, you know what? I am teary eyed today too. Bruce is getting me teary eyed. Okay, so then my brother was a huge advocate for women. He was always telling me, get out there and do it. I remember when I was 14, a friend of mine had invited me to take this really long bike ride. And it was during the summer. We were sitting at the dinner table, my siblings and my parents and I. My dad said, what are you guys doing tomorrow? And I said, well, my friend and I are going to take a 40-mile bike ride. And my dad said, absolutely not. And then later, my brother came over to me and said, don't listen to dad, take the bike ride. Take the bike ride. So of course I did because my brother told me to do it. So he was that kind of person. He always just said, go for it, do it. And especially for women, he was this huge advocate of women getting out there and really making something of themselves and breaking the glass ceiling. So we had chosen one of the charities as the Cubs charity because he was also a huge baseball fan. So whenever there was a donation made in his honor, the Cubs charity will send you a letter. And it always just helped me visualize my brother sitting in a park on a park bench watching young girls play softball. And that just always made me feel so good. So when you make a donation to a charity on behalf of someone's family member who has died, you really keep their memory alive and you really keep their legacy going. If there is not an obituary or one you can find, you can ask, what was your family member like? Because they'll want to tell you, they'll want to share. And then listen, just receive the story. And at the end of the story, thank them for sharing the story. Something that I like to tell people after a family member has died, and I knew their family member through them, I will thank them for allowing me to know their family member through them. And you could say something similar after they share the story. You can say, thank you. I'm grateful to know them through you. I just also want to mention something. I had a dream about my brother last night. I've not had any dreams about him. And in the dream, he was alive and I was able to give him a hug. And so that felt very good. It felt a little bit like closure. Okay. And then, if appropriate, and if you can offer an opportunity to get together to extend your support. I'd love to connect over lunch. When's a good day for you? And if it's the workplace and you're still virtual, you can connect for lunch virtually and enjoy a meal together virtually and then sharing what the experience is like for her or for him, and then what kind of support he or she would like to receive. So some questions that you can think about asking. So if you're connecting to a colleague who has returned to work after a family member's loss, and you've invited them to share a meal with you, a lunch, coffee, whatever it might be, you can ask some questions. And here are some suggestions for you. How has the return to work been for you? No one asks us that, right? When we come back to work after something terrible has happened, everybody is just like, well, something terrible happened to her. I don't know how to say it. I don't know how to deal with it. So I'm just going to put my blinders on and pretend it hasn't happened. But let's ask, how has the return to work been for you? Who's been supportive for you? What's helpful for you right now? What's challenging? What can we do at work to continue to support you? Now, depending on your relationship with your colleague, it could be that you just hear, but you actually aren't someone that can actually make the change. But it's just so helpful for someone to say, you know, what would really help me right now is this. And then you can even say, oh, I wish I could make that happen for you. If we could, what would change for you? Just continue the conversation. Just be open to what someone says about what they need. And then if you're connecting with a friend, very similar questions. Who's been most supportive to you? What's been helpful? What's challenging? And then what can we do to continue to support you? I have found when I ask that question, what can we do to continue to support you? Most people say, oh, it's just so nice to have someone to listen to me. And so you can do that. You can be that listener who receives the story. You're receiving the story is so comforting because we want to remember Kathy, who did the presentation earlier about transformative movement, and I co-host a grief support group twice a month. And you're welcome to join us. There's information on Carrying Our Way about when we connect. And we have figured out to integrate stories of those who have died into our meetings. And actually, Patty was at one of the meetings with another young woman, and we were talking about their family member who had died. And Patty ran to get a photo of her father. And then Ellen pulled up a photo of her mother. And we shared the photos. That was so powerful. It was so powerful. At that time, I wasn't able to look at any photos of my brother, so I couldn't do it, but I so enjoyed that they could. And you know what? It gave me hope that someday I'm going to be able to pull up a picture of my brother and say, this is my brother. This is my brother who died. Okay, now this is going to sound like a natural question that people will ask. How did he die? How did she die? But I will tell you, it is one of the most frustrating questions that I received. So my brother died at home. He wasn't feeling well the weekend before he died. And the autopsy basically said a massive heart attack, but we don't really know. And people would ask me all the time, well, what happened to him? How did he die? What was wrong? Was he ill? Oh my gosh, the questions about it just drove me nuts because I would just think, he died. It does not matter how he died or if he was sick or if he was taking care of himself. It does not matter. It only matters that he died. And so that was I wanted to just talk about the fact that he died. I didn't want to talk about before death. I wanted to talk about his death and after. And we actually had a text message exchange between Jackie, his wife, and my one sister and my brother, Keith. We were talking about that because people kept asking, what did he die of? Oh my gosh. And I finally just said, he lived until he died. And that's all that matters. He lived until he died. So it might be a natural inclination to ask, what happened? But sometimes we don't want to talk about what happened. So my brother, his death was a tragedy, but it wasn't because of anything awful, so to speak. He just lived his full life and then he died. But other times people have family members whose death is just absolutely tragic. And oftentimes we don't want to talk about the tragedy around what led to the death. So it doesn't matter how, it only matters that it happened. And if you are a close friend to the friend whose family member died, and that close friend wants to tell you the specifics, certainly receive that. You can even ask, how much do you want of this story to be private? Because there are some things that we just don't want to talk about, and that's okay. That's okay. So we are uncomfortable with death. We are uncomfortable with conversations about death. So it only is natural that we might struggle to find the right words or worry that we'll say the wrong words. And the best thing you can do is acknowledge your struggle. So in the chat room earlier, when I was asking, what's the insensitivity you've experienced around loss? Several of you talked about the silence. And I really believe our struggle creates the silence. So rather than struggling in silence and creating a struggle for someone else because of the silence, instead, say out loud you're struggling to find the right words. Just say it. And that way, the person who is grieving is no longer alone in the silence. There's a shared connection because you've expressed vulnerability, and your friend who is grieving is in the midst of raw vulnerability. That vulnerability will connect you. If you're not sure what to say, acknowledge it. And so it can sound like this. When there's a tragedy, you can say, oh my gosh, I don't even know what to say. This is just so tragic. You can say, I'm at a loss for words. This is just awful. After my brother died, I think it was almost a week later, we thought, okay, we've got to say this on Facebook. We've got to post it on Facebook. So I posted it on Facebook. And I remember one comment. It's the only comment I remember, but the comment was, this is just so awful for you. And I thought, oh my gosh, you get how awful this is. My parents are 90 and 87. So we were helping them with their grief, still providing care for them, and then trying to take care of my sister-in-law, take care of all the logistics of what it's like after someone dies. And you know what that's like. Oh, it's awful. So for someone to say, oh my gosh, this is just awful, I felt so seen. I felt so seen. And it's such a different sentiment than what you guys shared in the chat room, which is someone trying to unseen your reality by thinking you need to be cheered up. And you know what? You just want your reality to be seen. Something that I teach in our facilitator training is that as facilitators of support groups, we can empower members of our support group to actually share what are the words of support they want to hear. And then you're empowered to do it in the support group so that you're empowered to do it in your life. And you can empower your friend to do the same by asking, what words of support do you like to receive? I love to be able to say, I want to use the words that feel helpful and comforting to you. What words of support do you like to receive? Oh, thank you. These are the words of support I like to receive. And then you are no longer at a loss for words. You are equipped with the right words. Okay, and then you can check in. It doesn't have to be every day. It doesn't have to be on a schedule. It could just be regularly, whatever regular looks like to you. And it can be a simple statement, a simple text. I was thinking of you and wondering how your day is going so far. Just ask. And then on the days when we're struggling, because grief is up and down, some days we feel okay, other days we just feel awful. And it can be unexpected when the awfulness hits. And so when you see your friend struggling, you can say, today seems like a tough one for you, I think. How can I help? Again, it's so helpful when someone sees our reality and meets us in the reality rather than feeling like they have to take us out of our reality and cheer us up, because that just makes us feel unseen. We want to be seen. We want to be seen. Okay, so I'd love for you to share in the chat room. What are the words of support that you like to receive? And you can share the words of support you like to receive after a bad day, after a death, after a job loss, after a loss related to your family, after a loss related to a dream, because when our dreams are lost, that's something to grieve as well. Okay, so here are what you guys are sharing. I'm here if and when you need me. I'm listening. I can listen. Oh my gosh, I'm here for you. That must be so hard. I'm here with you. Are you okay? Thinking of you. Your dad was such a good man. Oh my gosh, you guys are so great at knowing what words of support you want to receive. This is awesome. Cling tight to your memories and may you find comfort in them. I'm here if you need me. I'm thinking of you. How are you doing? I just think it's so nice to be thought of, right? We just want people to think of us. And at my brother's service, the woman priest, which I thought was just awesome. So we are Catholic, and you know, women in the Catholic Church. That's all I'll say about that. So my sister-in-law's Episcopalian, so they were very active in an Episcopalian church. And so the priest was a woman. And so she talked after the eulogy around how can we support Jackie, my sister-in-law. And she also said, be sure to tell Jackie when you're thinking of Tim. Tim is my brother, because that will be of comfort to her. So I think that's also nice to let that grieving friend know that you're also thinking of the family member who died. Yeah. All these great words of support are so helpful for us to know that we need, right? And we can empower others in our life to share those words of support with us when we need them. I think oftentimes we just feel like we have to endure the wrong words of support. We don't have to. We can say, you know what? I was thinking about the words of support I like to receive, and here they are. And I wanted to tell you. So if you feel at a loss for words, you can use these words, because these words work for and with me. Yeah, so Taylor is sharing in the chat room. So many people told me they didn't want to talk about her parents because they didn't want to remind her of the loss. Well, yeah, you can't forget the loss. And I think we just want to remember that there was a life. I think there's something that happens as wondering. We talk about this in our grief support group all the time. It's the wondering around what happens after death, because someone is just gone. They are just gone. And it feels so odd. So to talk about them brings them back. They are no longer gone. They are somewhere else, I suppose. They are not gone to us, I guess, is really what I'm thinking. And to be able to talk about them brings them to life for us. And that's so helpful. So helpful. Okay. So thank you guys so much for sharing in the chat room. I hope you found it helpful. It's so important, I think, these days to know how to support someone who's grieving, because honest to goodness, it seems like almost every day I feel like someone I knew or someone I knew through someone else has a death in their family. It is just what is happening in our world today. And for us to be able to really share support that is supportive to those who are grieving can really transform their day. And maybe we can't transform their day that day, but we can transform a moment for them. And that's powerful. Okay, so there's some resources, and Deanne will share these resources in the chat room as well. And I wanted to mention the daily healing plan is for anyone who's grieving. It's a free course on carrying our weight, and it's really helpful. And then what I shared today is actually a flyer you can download, and it's words of comfort. And there's a link to the article. And then I've put my Kindle books for free, including After Caregiving Ends. If any of you are in a situation where caregiving has ended and you're thinking about what's next, After Caregiving Ends is a great resource for you. It's free today and tomorrow. Okay, thank you guys so much. We're going to take our lunch break. We're going to come back at top of the hour. So in 35 minutes. So I'll see you then. Thanks so much.